in Christchurch at this particular time, they're having to come to terms with rebuilding, recovery. They still haven't yet identified all the bodies that have been lost, etc., all that sort of scenario. So, whilst I'm standing in Wellington City, we have to ask ourselves, is our city safe? After the euphoria of rescue, recovery takes place, then there are questions that are brought forward. One of them is predictions. Has anybody tried to alarm Christchurch of what could take place, which we have witnessed of recent? I was amazed that in the year 1996, Bryan Bluck tried to warn his city that he was passionate for. And we saw this on TV3, where there was a documentary in which he warned of the very buildings that would become liabilities in the event of an earthquake to hit Christchurch.
Christchurch. The worst that's happened so far has been the toppling of the cathedral's spire. Few locals expect serious problems. But Christchurch does have a fatal flaw. It sits on a soft, shaky sponge of river stones and silt half a kilometre deep. In any decent quake, the garden city will shake like a leaf. When soils liquefy, sewers and drains come apart, roads break up, and buildings sink or tip over. Liquefaction will cause major damage here too, and no one knows if the water supply will stop or be polluted by a large quake.
Within weeks of the Napier earthquake, the Parliament set up a building committee which by June of 1931 had produced that report. In 1965, they didn't really change the standards much. And then in 1991, they adopted the Building Act. And again, instead of coming up with some modern technology and better wording, giving us something we could use, they go back to a standard which is not changed in 60 years. Because what's in there is just a smokescreen for lawyers.
So what does Bryan Bluck think of his own patch?
Oh, I can see little bumps over that window archway and the cracks coming down to the windows. And see, look just over those windows there, all the mortars come out of between the bricks. Yes. And all along the top there. It's not in a very good state. So if we serve notice, we can only ever get them to come up to half of 1965. Half? Yes, it's certainly making sure that those parapets won't drop on you and I when we're on the street. But it's not going to make sure you've got a building the day after the earthquake. But over the road we've got a building where they've started to do the strengthening. They've put some reinforced concrete frames in the bottom. The parapet has come off the top. They're spending the money on structures, whereas over behind us we've put paint on the building, some lovely weeds growing in the parapet. All they're doing is ruining the mortar and making sure that the bricks are just an amorphous collection of bricks. And this is where we come to what was the old DIC building. Now, there have been several alterations in the last few years, and those green columns at the ground floor there are much more substantial. Well, really, your heritage list, to be quite cruel, defines most of your earthquake-prone buildings.
When the big one comes, it may turn out to have been a complete waste of time.
Because every time we get an earthquake, of course, it cracks a few more elements and makes the building less able to resist the next one. The day after the earthquake, you may well have to demolish it because it's dangerous.
Was Bryan Bluck the only one to predict the ill effects that would take place if Christchurch were to be hit with an earthquake? As we know, there's been a lot of controversy around what we call the Moon Man. Ken Ring, as many of us know, he did predict that Christchurch would be hit with an earthquake around February the 20th, the 21st, etc. Give or take a few days. Now, he might have been 1 or 2 days off. What I do find interesting with Ken Ring, his predictions are based on the database of the heavens. He looks upward rather than downward. Our seismologists, experts, which we pay by the way, their way of doing a diagnostics, etc., is based on what's happening downward. Ken Ring's observations and database of looking upward, I'm actually akin to that. The Bible tells us that the heavens declare the glory of God. Jesus used these words, and he said that what would take place, he said that in the heavens he would show signs and wonders. we need to also ask ourselves, were there predictions about the events that happened in Christchurch going back a number of years even further than from what Bryan Bluck had said and Ken Ring? Over 2,000 years ago, a man that created a revolution, and he did it by a passive resistance. His name was EARTHQUAKE.avi, Jesus Christ. He did bring to our attention that there would be many earthquakes that would transpire in the last days. And it's interesting, these predictions that Jesus made in Matthew chapter 24, it was like you're reading the newspaper of today, because the headlines that we see in the newspapers are no different to what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24. So, now that we can understand that there were predictions of earthquakes, are we safe today? Here I am standing in Wellington City. Can we guarantee that this city that is supposed to be most susceptible to earthquakes could become a liability to the forces of nature that could hit the city?